setting, except that instead of using my default setting, it went for my computer's speakers, which are not the default because I set the mic as the default, but OBS wants the speakers to be the default. So every so often, for no apparent reason, it selects, and then it says they're not attached because I have them disabled. So now everybody can hear me. So there it is. Yay! And we will start over. And I will start. Yep, and I will start the whole video over because I am just mean like that. So you guys all get to hear the opener and everything. Here we go. Take 2.
All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Men are pigs. Women are equal to men. But women are wonderful. But men are pigs. And women are equal to men. But women are wonderful. But men are pigs. And women are equal to men. But women are wonderful. But men are pigs. And women are equal to men. But women are wonderful. But men are pigs. And women are equal to men. But women are wonderful. But men are pigs. And women are equal to men. But women are wonderful. But men are pigs. And women are equal to men. To men. To men. To men.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. The U.S. population has been in conflict over illegal immigration since the start of the Trump campaign. A number of issues have been raised around the topic, and most of these are starkly divided along the left-right poles of the political spectrum. But there's one aspect of it that seems to be almost universally accepted. That'd be the labels being used to describe the hordes of people caravanning from South American nations to the U.S. border. The purpose of each side's label is to characterize the entire group based on the most likely knee-jerk response to the way it's worded. While each side questions the validity of the other's assertions regarding the demographic makeup of the caravan, neither questions the other's demographic labels or their implications. There are reasonable statements that can be made in objection to the idea of allowing this to be the manner in which immigrants enter the United States. The actual questions being decided are about the rate and scope of immigration the country should allow, by what methods, and within what set of guidelines. What is to our benefit? What rights do U.S. citizens have regarding our nation's sovereignty and our control over our border? What obligations do we, as human beings, have to troubled citizens from other countries? What is the most reasonable and effective means of ensuring adherence to the limitations and methods we decide to use in our handling of immigration? Are we entitled to expect our authorities to vet immigrants individually so that we know which ones have violent criminal histories versus who is actually seeking asylum, or even just a better and safer job market? The discussion that should be happening has been entirely hijacked by political rhetoric, with a lot of meaningless guilt-tripping from the left, and the right responding with fear-mongering instead of calling them on it, because guilt-tripping and fear-mongering are easier ways to influence the public than logic and reason, and the answers to some of those questions are hard to settle. It's not that hard, however, to rip the guilt filter off the existing narratives promoting open borders. We're simultaneously being told that the people of these caravans are from such horrible environments rife with gang violence and political chaos that they must all be considered refugees with legitimate asylum claims, all traveling through nations that are also too horrible to live in, from which they cannot accept the asylum offers many have received, because they would not find safety there either. Of course, none of the nations involved should be called shitholes because that's racist, and we're not allowed to talk about the fact that criminals from those environments also travel illegally to the U.S., sometimes trafficking their fellow countrymen against their will, because that discussion is racist too. The obvious answer is to stop accepting the label racist as a counterargument to every bit of nuance in the discussion, and instead call it out as the thought-terminating cliché it is. Calling people racist for defending folks who don't want to be exploited as drug mules and slave labor doesn't help the world's vulnerable. The label has no value in the discussion. It is illegitimate, and it should be called out as such every time it is used. There are legitimate points being made in the discussion regarding the effects of mass migration on the economy, the importance of monitoring people's entry and exit from the country, and questioning and criticism of the migrants' choice to bypass that process. The rational end of the existing discussion is being undermined by another tactic, however. The right insists that the caravan is mostly comprised of military-age men. Numerous right-wing commentators have used that exact phrasing to describe all of the various caravans that have approached our border. It's designed to automatically associate the male sex with the concept of an organized, trained fighting force. They are not potential immigrants seeking entry into the country and perhaps even asylum. They are soldiers preparing to invade against the will of the country's citizens, and you'd better pay attention because our country is being invaded right now. You don't want to be taken over by evil, dangerous men from another country, do you? The most reasonable among these commentators add the caveat that they believe most of the migrants are just regular, ordinary citizens looking for a better life. That doesn't qualify them for asylum, but it also doesn't make them dangerous. Only some, we're told, are of ill repute. The commentators then go on to point out the presence of MS-13 gang members and the violent attacks on the borders of each country the caravan has passed through. The fact that some of the people in the most recent caravan had made clear by their actions that their intent was to force their way across the border rather than entering peacefully was heavily emphasized, even though those actions were not committed by all of the travelers. None of the statements made were false, but they are being composed in such a way as to frame the entire group as a violent, gang-led, military-style invasion that every American should fear enough for that idea to overshadow everything else in the debate. Some of that rhetoric should also be easy to break down. The demographic makeup of the caravan does include everything the right has described, but isn't limited to it or necessarily represented by the worst of it. Most importantly, being male doesn't automatically mean military, or gang, or even dangerous. Human trafficking victims come in both sexes, with men largely trafficked for slave labor. In previous episodes of HBR Talk, we highlighted the fact that some men were being forced against their will to act as drug mules as well. There are also men who do have to flee their home nations and seek asylum abroad due to religious or political persecution, or because they become the targets of cartel violence after opposing horrific crimes. There are also legitimate points being made regarding a desperate need for reformation to modernize the immigration process, which is needlessly slow and hard for asylum seekers and other immigrants to navigate. That valid discussion doesn't eliminate the need for border security, but does bear inclusion in the border security debate. Unfortunately, it's being undermined by another tactic also. Rather than emphasize that point or counter the men are dangerous narrative, the left responds instead by labeling the caravans mostly women and children. This one seems a pretty neat trick if you don't mind throwing men under the bus. There is already a tendency among people to view women as harmless and vulnerable, but by tacking on the mention of children, the commentator adds yet another layer of perceived innocence as a weapon against objection to their approach. Combining perception of women with perception of children is a shield against standards and personal boundary enforcement. We give up things for kids and tolerate behavior from kids that we would not in the case of an adult. This label has a history of getting women access to benefits that society normally reserves for children by virtue of being attached as caregivers. What do we hear when there's a rescue underway in the wake of a disaster? Women and children first. Even charity is collected using heartstring-pulling incarnations of the concept. People who just don't have the cash right now to help fund the construction of a local homeless shelter will dig a little deeper to find a few dollars to help out, if it's going to house widows and orphans. When the left uses the label women and children, the listener is being primed to view any objections to their demands as illegitimate due to the harmless, vulnerable, and socially entitled nature of the demographic on whose behalf they claim to argue. The caravan is no longer a mass of foreign people bent on needlessly, willfully ignoring the legal protocol for how to enter the United States. They're society's most vulnerable, entitled to ignore that protocol just because of who they are. And you better not question that, you heartless, sexist bastard. Or maybe it's that you're gutless. After all, what kind of coward is afraid of a bunch of harmless women and children? This rhetoric, obviously, isn't any better than that of the right. As HBR Talk has pointed out numerous times, being female does not make a person harmless. Much of the drug trafficking across the southern border of the U.S. is done by women. There are women in positions of cartel leadership as well, like Sandra Avila Beltran, aka Queen of the Pacific, aka Cocaine Queen, or Melissa La China Calderon, infamous for kidnapping her murder victims from their family homes and returning their dismembered bodies to their doorsteps as a warning to the local community. Most of the world's nations also allow women to enlist in their military forces, some with few or no limitations. How many of the women in this caravan are military age? It would be quite reasonable to ask why, as military-age men are being emphasized, military-age women are never mentioned. It would also be reasonable to ask, what is military age exactly? When discussing nations' official enlistment, that age might be that of adulthood. But when discussing drug cartels and gangs, is that a relevant measure? They begin drafting their warriors at much younger ages, even as young as pre-adolescence, and they're not all male either. Venus Romero Irahita, an MS-13 gang member, stabbed Damaris Alexandra Reyes Rivas 13 times, killing her, then dispassionately confessed the crime in detail to Springfield, Virginia police, all while she was still underage. But hey, what's a little harmless murder between teen girls, am I right? Of course, it does not suit either the guilt-tripping narrative or the fear-mongering narrative to point out the facts that contradict each other's labels and biases. If women are not harmless and men can be unwilling victims of human trafficking, then there is neither guilt in the act of vetting immigrants, nor reason to automatically fear all of them. Nuance in the discussion would have to be addressed. Answers for the most relevant questions would have to be debated. That would be hard and uncomfortable for both sides. It is much easier for politicians and pundits to rely on the age-old tactic of thought-terminating, dehumanizing cliches to shut the discussion down altogether. After all, why do the work of addressing the issues at hand when endless fighting and finger-pointing is an effective means of manipulating the voting public and keeping one's audience entertained? These elite professional rhetoricians have little motivation to stop using men as their scapegoats and women as their shields. Their hyperbole is contagious, divisive, and damaging to both sexes. Maybe we ought to just build a wall around them. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 66, Attack of the Stereotropes, Military-Age Men versus Women and Children. And yeah, each one is all one word, 'cause I'm just mean like that. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren B. and She Who Must Be Obeyed, Karen Straughan, to dismantle a couple of politically expedient, thought-terminating cliches, because we're just mean like that. But first, I'm going to nag you because I'm female and we women just do that. So, come on guys, go to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications so you'll always know the who, what, where, and when of Honey Badger Radio. If you want to support what we do, even in the midst of all of the financial blacklisting that is taking place today, and there seems to be a new piece of information on that every day, feedthebadger.com is the site for that. So remember, Badger Feed for information and Feed the Badger to support our work, because we try to be as confusing as possible. Last thing, if you want the opportunity to nag everyone else into checking us out, don't forget to smash that like button and share us on social media, every site you use. The power to overcome social media throttling is in your hands. Use it! And now, on to the power of thought-terminating cliches. The more you use, the dumber the conversation gets. Can you feel its logic level dropping?
It's always dropping, Hannah. It's always dropping.
It drives me nuts. Short trip.
It's the eternal game of how low can you go.
And this one I decided we really needed to get into simply because I looked at a lot of the different things. I mean, there's a lot to discuss regarding immigration itself, and I'm not at all against immigration reform. I'm also in favor of the wall, so I'm kind of on both sides of the fence, so to speak. But this use of the idea of military age men, demonizing the men of the other, the group that's being othered, and combining it with,
Didn't Obama bring in rules when it came to drone strikes, that if there was a male over the age of 15 who was killed, he was just automatically considered a combatant.
Yes, he
rather
did.
Than a civilian, because he's 15. He's 15, and therefore he's a combatant. It doesn't matter whether he is actually a combatant. It matters that he's 15 and capable of being a combatant, and therefore that the murder essentially is justified by the age of the boy.
Yep. Yeah, this one was, there was a lot of outrage on one side of the political fence and a lot of excuses on the other side when that came out. And, there's a couple of different things that were talked about there, too. If you look at organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the drug cartels and, all of the organizations that are illegal in their countries, that are attacking their countries and our countries, that is military age. But if you're talking civilians, and Obama had drone strikes that occurred in civilian areas, not everybody there was involved with the enemy. Not everyone there was even close to being involved with the enemy. In fact, the enemy was in amongst people they were victimizing. And so that 15-year-old might have been...
It was almost as if the murder justified labeling the boy as a combatant.
Yeah. And that 15-year-old could have been a target of the enemy that we were targeting just as easily as he could have been the target of our military. We had no way of necessarily proving that. And yet Obama did deem that to be the case. That was that was one a lot of people were very upset about.
Yeah, and it only makes the case for strong border laws even more, because if you have that one guy in the middle of a bunch of good guys, you have to, how do you stop that one good guy? You have to have strong border security. There's really no way to argue against it if you care about anyone else in your country.
Right. Well, and then there's also the fact that, all right, there are people who come here to escape the cartels because they have witnessed crimes that the cartels have committed, that individuals within the cartels have committed, and they have testified to the government or testified in court. They've helped to try to stop these crimes, and now they are targets. And they come here hoping to get away. But if anybody can come here, then the hitmen from the cartels can follow them and kill them here just as easily as they can in their home communities, can't they?
Yep. Absolutely.
So this idea of military age men, though, it immediately is intended to bring to mind the idea that all men, all boys, basically old enough to pick up a gun and figure out how to use it or take instruction on how to use it should automatically be considered dangerous, and only boys. Because at the other end of it, we have, at the other end of the right's military age men narrative is the left's women and children narrative. And the stark comparison there, I watched, and I don't remember which one I had on at the time where it really struck me, because I've seen it on Tucker Carlson's show, and I like that show because there's usually more logic, but I've also seen it on Hannity. I'm not as big of a fan of Hannity because he's more of a, I'd say he's more of an ideologue. And like, he's got, his ideology isn't necessarily all bad, but he's kind of married to it. But I've seen them both do it, where their guest comes on and says, women and children, the caravan is all women and children, and as if that would make it not dangerous. Whether it were true or not, which it's not, but whether it was true or not, what if a caravan comprised entirely of women, and then the only guys in the caravan were underage? There would still be a threat. just as much as there would be with men. And there would still be the same number of people that needed to get across. I don't know if I'm talking over you guys or... Oh, no, Karen's muted.
Sorry, I'm cooking while I'm on the radio.
See that?
So
Slave labor in the kitchen. You're not barefoot,
Yeah.
are you, Karen?
Yeah. No, I am barefoot. I am barefoot. Because I don't like socks and I don't like shoes. So, but essentially, I honestly think, it really, and I have to recommend this video to anybody who hasn't seen it. It's called Son of Threat Narrative, The Ugly Tropes. And I think it's on Alison's personal YouTube channel, Typhon Blue. Or maybe it's under the name Alison Tiemann now, right? Because, fear of those men over there is one of the easiest ways to mobilize a population, right? To mobilize a population in a defensive way, to mobilize a population in an offensive way. Those men over there, they are the bad men, right? And what are the tropes that we use, right? To do that. We say they're coming to hurt our women and children, right? And as Alison pointed out in that video, which is absolutely spectacular, right? The ultimate ugly trope, right, is not they're coming to hurt our women and children. It is they are so awful, they hurt their own women and children. So there is, what we have is we have a defensive stance when we see these military age men, I guess, when there's sort of a hint of an invasion, right? We have this defensive stance. We need to close our borders, right? But what gets us to actually go on the offensive, right? It's they're so awful, they hurt their own women and children. That's when we go and invade other people's countries. And that's when we're willing to sign on to that, regardless of what the actual reason is, whether it's oil or trade or regime change or whatever bullshit that the State Department thinks up, right? What gets the population behind that is those guys over there are so horrible, they hurt their own women and children. So we need to rescue their women and children from them, right? So it's an absolutely, it's a hideously toxic weapon, right? It's like a chemical weapon. It's like a biological weapon, that we deploy against ourselves, or that our governments deploy against us, right? In order to get us to back certain decisions that they want to make, right? So, I mean, like, I would absolutely go, and I would absolutely go, everybody, after the show is done, go and search on YouTube, Son of Threat Narrative, The Ugly Tropes, and go watch that video. If you haven't watched it, you're missing out. It really lays bare all of this in just a most beautiful, exquisite way. And I think that what we need to do, and one of the things, like, I have some guys on Reddit, right, who message me all the time saying, well, here's this person you like who's denigrating Muslim men. Here's this person you like denigrating Middle Eastern men. Here's this person you like denigrating these men in this third world country for oppressing their women. And, what are you going to do about it? And it's like, well, I'm going to pick my battles, right? Because, if we have a feminism that can denigrate Western men as oppressing women, then, like, I need to actually convince the men and women in Western society that their own men aren't oppressing their own women before I can actually go into the murky difficult territory of convincing them that, you know, maybe things aren't as simple in the Middle East in terms of, you know, all the men live like kings and all the women are sex slaves, right? Maybe it's not as simple as that, right? But before I can convince anybody in this society, right, in this society, that that's the case, I have to convince these people that Western men don't oppress their women. Because if they can't believe that Western men don't oppress their women, how am I going to convince them that Muslim men don't oppress their women?
One of the things that bugs me about the, this person that you like says this, or this person that you like says that, what are you going to do about it? Aspect is, I'm not their mom. You know, there's a lot of, I will argue with people over their outlook when we are in conversation, but I'm not going to go track everybody down in the political spectrum that I agree with on one thing and tell them they have to walk in lockstep with me on everything. You don't convince people that way, and it doesn't benefit any movement to make that demand. And, like we've had some people commenting on the blog that way, and they're demanding that valid issues not be raised because there are invalid conclusions being drawn from them. And I'm not going to do that.
No.
And I'm not going to condone that either. So I'm seeing that's one of the things that I'm seeing. Now, the thing of picking your battles, that's another good reason, another very important thing. And this is something that Karen's really right about. The fact that if people are not going to accept that American women are not oppressed. American women are at the top of the world food chain in terms of how women live. There's nobody less oppressed in the whole world than we are. There's nobody more pampered in the entire world than American women. And yet there's an unfortunately large contingent of American women that think they're oppressed by American men who built an entire civilization of safety and convenience for us. And they did it largely for us. And our children.
Oh yeah, no, it's like I told in my video commenting on Jordan Peterson's interview with Kathy Newman, right? Kathy Newman, if everything around you that was not invented, developed, built, maintained, delivered, or produced by men disappeared, you would be doing your interview in a grass hut over a dung fire.
Yeah.
Right. That's what would be happening. And so like that, the level of ingratitude is absolutely, and I'm going to go straight up with Jordan Peterson on this, the level of ingratitude among people living today, right? We are the top 0.1% of everybody who has ever lived. If you were born into the West, even if you were born in poverty, right? You are still living a better life than your grandparents did and your great grandparents did. You have a Nintendo, for fuck's sake, right? And cable TV, right? And hot and cold running water. My grandmother had cold running water into her kitchen when she was running a general store and a post office and raising a family. She had cold running water. She had to boil it on the stove to make a bath. And then everybody, and this is where you get the don't throw out the baby out with the bathwater, because by the time, because you went by age and the amount of work done, right? Who took the bath in the bathwater first? You used the same fucking bathwater because you couldn't be bothered to draw more or heat it up, right? Fresh for every person in the family. And the baby was the one who was bathed last. And the water was so opaque that you literally could pick up the tub, throw it out the door without realizing the baby was in it.
Yep. And be careful that the baby doesn't go down the plug hole. Now you have to look that song up now. Your baby has gone down the plug hole just because. But the thing about this is, I got a short way of putting it. you know that you're not oppressed. You know that you're pampered. If you panic because the power went out for an hour, and I know people that have, like an hour, power goes out for an hour, they don't know what to do with themselves. So that's privilege.
If you panic because you need cigarettes and your husband has the car, so you are going to have to walk 6 blocks to get them?
Yeah, that's privilege.
Yeah.
That's some fucking privilege there.
Yeah.
And I could probably, if I wanted to, find a service. I could probably contact Uber and say, I don't need a ride anywhere, just bring me cigarettes.
Don't you guys have stuff like Dine Dash or whatever it is? That I haven't used it much, but they bring you your food?
Skip the dishes. Yeah.
I'm sure you probably could get them to stop and get you cigarettes. See, so you would be that pampered. So this is like, now at the other end of it, that's not to say that there are no criticisms of things like Sharia law. I mean, this is another one. People talk all the time about Sharia law as a misogynistic thing. Well, it's not specifically. It's a human rights issue in and of itself. You could say it is the legal formula for
enforcement
of human rights violations.
Well, enforcement of gender roles, right?
Yeah, well, not necessarily just gender roles, though. There are aspects of the religion that are, I mean, it's, it's religious law. Yeah. So it's, and that's not the only thing about it that's true either, that it's the religious law of human rights violation, but it does affect, like, if you get beheaded, it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, you're equally dead. If you get whipped to death, it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, you're equally dead. So there are the idea that this is something that targets one sex and not the other. That I will argue with, but at the same time, I will not track everyone down on the internet that makes the mistake of only looking at the female side of it. First, you have to train them not to only look at the female side of their own surroundings.
Yes.
Before you train them not to only look at the female side of something that's across the sea. And whether it is misogynistic or not, I do not want Sharia law to become the law of my area. I don't want it affecting my son or my daughters. So there's my objection to it. And it doesn't have to do with gender.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, it does have to do with gender in the sense of, like, it applies strict gender roles, right? Strict gender role enforcement, right? The man is the provider. He has to provide everything for the household. He's not allowed to touch if his wife works or has income or property, he's not allowed to touch it. But he has to provide her everything she needs. And if he's unable to do that or unwilling to do that to her satisfaction, she can go to a court and enforce that, right? And actually get alimony while still married, which is something that is, I mean, if you go and you look at how things work, because I actually read all of the articles of family law in Iran, right? And if you look at how that works, that is what Western law looked like after feminism had tinkered with it for about 100 years, right? So in some sense, when feminists say, well, Muhammad was the first, he was a feminist, well, yeah, for his day, he absolutely was, right? And right now, women under Sharia have benefits and privileges and entitlements that Western women do not have, and men have obligations and burdens that Western men do not have by law, right? Okay, so there you go.
Although there aren't very many, because if you think about it, there are ways for women to force their men in the West into most of those ideals, simply because all a woman has to do to turn a guy's life into an absolute train wreck. And in some places, she doesn't even have to divorce him to do it. In some states, there are clones of the Violence Against Women Act that have been tweaked to do some of the things you're talking about. All she has to do is say, I'm afraid of him. Not even he hit me, just I'm afraid of him. Gets herself a restraining order. As soon as she's got the restraining order, she can kick him out of the house without getting a divorce. She has custody of the kids. He has to support her. He has to pay all the bills. He's considered abusive if he doesn't, and he can't touch any of her income. And there are states in the United States where that is law. The only difference is she has to lie to get it. That's it.
And on top of that, when she goes to the court, they'll help her do it. They will show her how to do it. And I believe in a lot of places, a lot of states, if there's a fee at all, it's nominal. So,
it's super easy for women to get that. But, it really is that the woman in the Western world now, with equality having gotten to the point that it has, women have to lie to get those benefits. But under Sharia in Iran, anyway, I was literally reading the articles of family law. This is the law in Iran. If the situation in the household is such that there is risk of physical injury to the wife, or injury, financial injury, or injury to her dignity, then she's entitled to set up a household on her own, separate from her husband, that will be paid for by him, including servants if she has become accustomed to them. And he will have to provide for her in that milieu, right, as part of his husbandly obligation. And then on top of that, he's not allowed to take any second, because you can have up to 4 wives, right? He's not allowed to take on another wife if she objects, right? So she has veto power, right? So here she is sitting in a separate household, paid for entirely by him, including servants, right? And she can say, yeah, you're never going to have sex again. You're never going to legally have sex again.
Yeah,
right?
And that
entire society is like, extramarital sex. Yeah, no, you're going to get punished.
And in that vein, if he gets caught,
premarital sex, you're going to get punished.
If he gets caught in adultery, because it would be adultery if he's married. If I understand right now, I don't know which countries actually follow this and which don't, but I know that under Sharia law, that's the death penalty.
Yes, yeah.
It's not just you were engaging. Yeah, it's not just.
But you're going to get punished.
And see now, some of the countries go with death penalty, and some of them go with other punishments. But even the punishments, even the minor punishments, are major. They beat you with a cane. They beat you with a whip, like a bull whip.
And then they put you in prison for 2 years.
So I don't know if anybody's ever been in a weeping willow branch fight. Like my friends and I used to do that when we were kids. And you put on long sleeve everything. You wear, if you're smart, you wear glasses or goggles so it doesn't hit you in the eye. When those things hit you, they lay open your skin. And that's just a weeping willow branch. If somebody actually were to take a whip made of leather to you with a vengeance, not just the way people do it for fun, but with a vengeance, it would lay open your skin.
It ain't snapping towels in the men's room.
It's not fun. And this is the punishment. This is the kind of punishment that you would be looking at if you were a guy in that situation and you decided to go get some tail somewhere else.
And here's the thing. She has an out, right? If she can leverage it, if she can make it work, if she can actually convince the court, right? She can say he raped me, right? Okay. And so here we have 2 people. They've been caught having sex with each other, and and that gets you this horrific penalty, right? He has no fallback plan. There's no nothing, right? There's no nothing, right? Because the penalty for rape and the penalty for adultery is the same for him, right? So as long as the sex was proved to have happened, right? He's gonna suffer the penalty, right? But she has this get out of sex, regrettable sex free card called I'm gonna say he raped me. And this is one of the things, and I think that most people who talk about Sharia and they talk about Islam and they talk about all these things, and they're like, women get stoned to death for being raped, and it's like, no, women get stoned to death for committing adultery just like men do, right? But every single woman who's ever been accused of adultery, I can guarantee you, said, I didn't commit adultery, he raped me. Because if she successfully argues that in court, she walks away with her honor intact and her husband can't even divorce her, right? So if she convinces the court that she was raped and not committing adultery, not only does she walk away scot-free with her honor intact, but her husband can't even divorce her and leave her with nothing, right? So essentially you have a situation where if I make this claim and if I convince the courts that this claim is valid, right? Not only do I not die, I don't suffer any negative consequences at all, right? So of course, every single woman accused of committing adultery is going to bring that accusation. My lover raped me, right? And I know this because I know a guy, he freaking wrote to me describing this story. He's an American kid whose parents divorced and his father moved to Germany, converted to Islam and married a Muslim woman. And one of his stepmother's friends used to visit them often. I think her nickname was Princess. And she would regale the family about her lover, who she thought was so virile and so wonderful and so incredible and so hot in bed and so much better than her elderly, wealthy husband, right? So much better at exciting her and bringing out the animal in her, the inner woman in her, and all of this stuff, right? And she spoke very freely about it, he said, right? This was obviously somebody who was having a consensual affair, extramarital affair, right? And then the husband found out. And then the law got involved. And then the couple was put on trial. And what did this woman say in court? She said, he snuck into my room as smoke through the keyhole. And he placed a spell on me that made me keep coming back to him for more sex. And because I was under his witchcraft, because I was under his spell, I did not consent to any of it. And guess what? He got executed, and her husband was legally barred from divorcing her over it.
Well, little did everybody know she'd been dating Zeus.
But if the court had not bought that ridiculous fucking story, okay, she would have been executed alongside her lover, but she would be the only person in the headline. A woman stoned to death after she claimed she was raped. She was stoned to death for being raped. The rapist, he's obviously like just living the high life. Nobody would even fucking know that he was also stoned to death.
In some countries, they hang rapists and they put them on display. And this is something that I was informed of, and then I made the mistake of looking it up. It's not really something that you want to look up unless you're okay with looking at dead bodies on the internet. But
yeah, no, it isn't. And
they hang them up in groups.
Rape was the last non-lethal offense that could get you the death penalty in every single Western country. I guarantee you.
Yeah.
In non-lethal offense, not capital murder, right? Because even in the US, right, where, you know, like the death penalty is way more widely used than in any other Western country, right? First degree murder, that's what gets you the death penalty now. But you know what? No. The last non-lethal offense that could get you the death penalty was rape.
Yep, and those military age men there, those military age men that have no accountability, like I said, get put on display to show all the other military age men that have no apparent accountability what will happen to them if they engage in that crime. So this idea that it's a rape culture over there. Now there is a rape culture in Sharia law. If a man is raped, especially if he is raped by another man, if he is raped, he doesn't have an out. If there's actually been I can't remember the country, but a news article, I don't remember whether it was Iran or Saudi Arabia, but there was a guy who made the news as a rape victim who was given the death penalty for the crime of being raped because he was raped by another guy, and the court decided that made him gay, and it was death penalty offense to be gay. So
yeah, oh, absolutely. It's you know, there was a young man who I think he was 15 years old, whose parents this was it was about like 8 years ago or something like that. His parents moved to Dubai, I think, and he was sort of being ridiculous and not managing his risks as a 15-year-old boy, and was gang raped by some adult men who picked him up. I guess he was walking along the road and they were like, "Do you want to ride?" And he was like, "Sure." And he was put in prison. It was like a major freaking thing. I think he was a Canadian boy, and it was he was put in prison pending execution for homosexuality, and I think his parents, with the help of the Canadian government, managed to get him out of there.
Which is one better than gets done for boys in Afghanistan. And boys in Afghanistan are subjected to prostitution. Look up an article called "The Dancing Boys of Afghanistan." That is a rape culture.
95% of sex workers in Afghanistan are underage boys. 95% of sex workers are underage boys. And one of the most horrific things, because, you know, people say, okay, well, so there's this book called The Kite Runner, and it was turned into a movie, and it won the Pulitzer Prize and all of that stuff, right? And so there's all this attention, you know, on this particular issue of these boys who are sexually exploited by older men, and it's not because, well, it's not because homosexuality is in any way allowed. It's because these boys dress as women, and they present closely enough to women that it's not considered homosexuality under local custom, right? And at the same time, women themselves are off limits. Women themselves, if you engage a female prostitute, you're actually looking at maybe looking down the barrel of a gun, or, you know, hangman's noose, or whatever form of execution that they're going to employ, because those people are off limits. People with vaginas are not allowed to be used in this way, right? So we can use boys this way, and if we make them look enough like women, then it means we're not gay according to local custom. And it's like, it's just completely fucking fucked up, right? But what you won't see, right, when it comes to women who are sexually assaulted in Afghanistan, is the U.S. military saying, if you hear a girl being raped in the house next door repeatedly, night after night, screaming in pain, right? Whatever you do, just ignore it, right? Whatever you do, just ignore it, because it's local custom and you don't want to mess with local custom. But the U.S. military actually fired an officer, right? Fired him. He was discharged, dishonorably discharged, for after several nights listening to a prepubescent boy getting raped, right? Listening to the screaming, went over there and punched the guy, the rapist, in the face, beat him up. Okay? And that got him fired from the military. That ruined his military career. And that was just a couple of years ago.
Yep. That was one, when that information came out, that our military was telling the soldiers not to do anything about it and penalizing them if they did. If I understand correctly, there was finally discussion, because it became public, there was finally discussion as to whether or not policy should change on the military bases, not off of the military bases, not, hey, don't tell these people that this part of their culture, that you see this part of their culture is backward because they're hurting children. Just don't, maybe let it happen on the military bases. And that's it. So we kind of pick and choose as a society what we're going to deal with and what we're not going to deal with, and depending on whether we're dealing with people that we've taken on as allies or people we've taken on as enemies. Guaranteed, if we were the opposing force instead of the fighting force alongside the people who this was their culture, that would have been demonized, and they would have found a way to equate those boys with women. They're a replacement for women, it's misogynistic, and all of a sudden it would have been those men over there, they're gonna rape our women again. And you see this with the caravans approaching the United States border. One of the things that Fox News did was play over and over and over again discussion of, there have been a couple of confirmed instances where an illegal immigrant committed a rape, and it made national headlines. And there was one that raped a kid, and that made national headlines, of course. And those are brought up over and over again. They haven't, and it's all men. They're all talking about men. They haven't brought up much in terms of, they did mention the girl that I mentioned, the teenager that killed the other teenager. And by the way, both of those teen girls were immigrants. Both of them, their mothers came to the United States first, and they were left at home alone and traveled here after, along the same routes that the migrants travel. So both of those girls had been basically abandoned and then had to come here. One of them ended up in a gang. The other one came here and found her mother, and then the gang member killed the one that came here and found her mother. And yet we didn't see that over and over again. We didn't see that emphasized. We didn't see, hey, those women over there, those military age women, those women who could be gang members, those women who could be muling for cartels, those women who are the bulk of the body of the population that transports heroin in balloons in their stomach. Transports cocaine in balloons in their stomach. We don't hear what a threat the right thinks they are, because they can't get the same kind of mileage with that. They only get that kind of mileage with those men over there. Those men over there is what feminists use. Those men over there is what we hear all the time when we're trying to discuss Islam, and people are demonizing all of Islam instead of talking about, hey, there's this one violent group that's terrorizing everybody. Those men over there are what we hear about India, where there is a 65 to 85% rate in false rape allegations. We hear those men over there are beasts. They rape left and right. They're horrible. And one case is trotted out over and over again. to make them all look bad, while ignoring that 65 to 85% false rate. 65% is confirmed. It includes things like women who have made rape accusations because of breach of promise to marry, and parents who have made rape accusations after their daughter eloped with a guy they didn't want him to marry. So there's a large number of cases brought to police in India that once they actually find out what the case is, it turns out it's not a rape at all. And then there's about 20% where there's something that caused the case not to go forward, like the witness, the alleged victim became hostile. She recanted her story, but didn't provide evidence that she was telling the truth when she recanted, or there just wasn't enough evidence to go forward. So there's the 20%. And the remaining 15%, those are more unknown. Those are the cases that go forward, but it's not necessarily a 15% conviction rate either. So it could even be higher. But yeah, those men over there, we hear it about every society. Military age men, we hear it about every society. And we don't ever seem to get any discussion that relates to compassion for those men over there. We very rarely hear from the general public. We very rarely hear from the right. We very rarely hear from anybody trying to demonize a society. Hey, did you know that boys are being exploited in this industry? That no, not just those men over there, but hey, those male victims over there. You know, we don't hear that.
I was going to bring up, Boko Haram and how it didn't get any media attention until Michelle Obama held up that sign that said, "Bring back our girls." Meanwhile, no one cared about the boys that were getting killed.
You can't bring them back.
No, you can't bring them back. They're dead. But,
Well, but here's the thing. Because there were 10,000 boys, right? There were hundreds of boys killed in the school attacks, right? Killed, burned alive, rounded up and machine gunned and grenaded to death and all of those things, right? So hundreds of boys killed in overt school attacks where, there were bodies to count. There were more than 10,000 boys in Nigeria who were kidnapped by Boko Haram over the course of the 8 years that they were sort of running rampant through that country, right? And so we had 279 girls who were kidnapped, and 10,000 boys. And so, and here's the thing, right? When I talked to Cassie J for the red pill, I was not aware of these kidnapped boys because it had not been publicized, right? I was aware of the deaths, right? And I was like, what the fuck, right? But if I had known about these kidnapped boys, I would have been able to argue against all of the stupid freaking sheeple out there who said, well, the real reason, it isn't because they don't care about the boys. It's because the boys are dead and the girls are alive. So there's still hope of rescue. And that's why people are getting behind this. Right. And I'd be like, well, I would have said, what about the 10,000 boys kidnapped by Boko Haram, right? Who are probably being subjected to sexual abuse, almost certainly, right? Who are having a machine gun forced into their hands, right? And they're wearing flip-flops and being told at age 9 to frickin' kill other people, right? And if you don't, we're going to kill you, right? Like, how is this in any way different other than the fact that the scale of the human tragedy is so much more vast when you're talking about 10,000 boys versus 279 girls, right? And then I'm looking at the Nigerian newspapers reporting on the fact that the kidnapped boys are starting to escape, right? And the government is wondering, how do we deal with this? And they're essentially saying, well, we're probably going to have to imprison or execute them because we don't have the resources to rehabilitate them after what they've been through. And it's horrible, yes, but we just don't have the resources, so we're probably just going to...
The treatment for
herb.
The treatment for boys with PTSD is lead poisoning, in other words.
Yeah, or I guess, if the bars are made of lead too, I mean, like they were considering putting them in prison rather than executing them, right? And of course, I get it, right? Because the boys who were kidnapped would have killed any number of people, right? Because they were forced to, just like the girls who were kidnapped would have had sex with any number of people because they were forced to, right? And I guess submitting to sex against your will is, something that you can be seen as the sole victim of, whereas killing people against your will is, you're not the only victim there. I can understand it, but I can't understand the fact that these child soldiers, right, these boys, right, anywhere from like 8 years old up, right, that a government could say, well, we might just have to toss them in the trash. We might just have to call it a wash, right? Just accept the losses and just move on from there. Just, liquidate and get on with it.
How quickly and easily they became military-age men.
Yeah, to their own government. Their own government. This is not a foreign government talking about foreign military-age boys. This is their own government talking about their own boys. Yeah. I was just flabbergasted.
What we have there really is a government deciding that because the boys have been influenced by the other, they are now part of the other, and they are dangerous no matter what, that they can't be rehabilitated. Like, you wouldn't be able to reintegrate them into their families, as though their families couldn't, through bringing them home and providing them a home environment, bring them back into their society. Even if they're damaged, even if they're they're exhibiting symptoms of PTSD, you would still have loyalty to your family.
What's frustrating too is that these articles where the Nigerian government was like, okay, what are we going to do? Like, maybe we should just write the whole thing off. That was when the boys who were returning were escapees. Yeah. Right? That was not when these boys were being captured, right? That came after.
So they were trying to abandon what they had been forced into, and they were still going to kill them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, and it wasn't even so much, oh goodness, like they're impossible to rehabilitate. It was, there's so many of them and it's so expensive, we can't afford to put the resources in, right? We could rehabilitate every single one of them, but we just don't have the money and the political will to do it. So I was just like, that was what it seemed to me.
And that's male disposability at the epitome of male disposability. That is, that's right up there with targeting baby boys for being aborted just because they're male. These boys were essentially going to be killed because they were male. They didn't talk about killing the girls. They only talked about killing the boys. That's absolutely... feminists talk about girls being targeted and women being targeted because they're female. Well, that's boys being targeted because they're male. Little boys, like 8 years old, that's a second grader. 8 years old, That's a kid who, in the United States, there's a chance that he expects Santa Claus to bring him presents on Christmas Day. That's a kid who still has, games like tag and stuff at his birthday party, and probably thinks girls are icky. Even if he's going to grow up to be straight. And he's already old enough to throw away by some societies.
Well, I mean, there are societies, right, out there where female fetuses are disproportionately targeted for abortion and things like that. India had a problem with that for quite a while. China had a problem with that for quite a while. But what you're looking at is not necessarily that girls are disposable, it's that girls are expensive in those societies, right? Girls are expensive. Boys are a net gain. They're a paycheck, right? Your boy is a shovel. Everybody needs a shovel, right? And your boy is a shovel, and he's going to work for you because he's a shovel. And girls are more of an ornament. And do we really need this heirloom that we have to take care of? And yeah.
And Asian cultures, a lot of Asian cultures, the boy is expected to take care of the parents when they get old. The girl isn't necessarily. So that's your insurance policy for old age.
It is. And I was arguing with a feminist, God, it was ages ago, after I did my female privilege backfiring video, where I talked about China specifically, and Afghanistan as well, and sort of the restrictions placed on women, and some of the adverse effects of gender roles that impact, that when you look at it, they can really play out badly for women, like in China, being aborted or abandoned as a baby, if you're a girl. But then you have to actually look at the other side of the picture and figure out exactly why this is happening. It's not happening because people hate girls, because even in China, during their one-child policy, you still had people willing to have girls, right? You still had people who were maybe better situated than their neighbors or whatever, who were willing to have girls, even though girls are costly, even though a one-child family with a son is actually a two-child family when it comes to providing for you, right? Your son and his wife providing for you in old age, and a family with just a daughter is a zero-child family or worse, right? Because if she doesn't get married, stop it. If she doesn't get married, then you end up paying for her, right? You end up actually being responsible for her.
Is that a spray bottle?
Yes, I'm squirting that dog. Anyway, because there's nothing out
Sorry,
there.
Karen the disciplinarian.
Oh my God, shut up! I'm going to throw the bottle. God. Anyway,
oh my God.
So what we have is a situation where what the left or what feminists want to say is Chinese culture just hates girls, right? And they don't want to look at, okay, what's the actual difference between sons and daughters that could actually explain this? Oh, it's that sons have a financial responsibility, a legally enforceable financial responsibility toward their parents, and daughters do not, right? And then I had this one stupid feminist who said, well, I just read the outcome of a lawsuit, right, that disproves your point, right? And you know what the outcome was, right? Because I told her, like I essentially said, you can find lawsuits by parents against their sons saying you're not supporting us, so give us more money, right? And she as to disprove this, there was a young woman who was sued by her elderly parents because she didn't visit enough. She had an obligation under the law to visit, to maintain ties with her parents. That's like me saying that's like the difference between me phoning my fucking mother-in-law, which is a chore for sure. Okay. Phoning her once a week or sending her a check for $800 once a week. Right? Okay. Which do you think is the more onerous burden?
Right.
Jeez.
God.
That makes the Western mom going, you never call, you never write, I didn't even get an email from you, you haven't texted me in days. Kind of petty. I'll sue you because you haven't visited me enough. Boy. Honestly, there are women out there, and this is one of those things that I just can't relate with other women about. Is there are women out there who like they keep score, right? So they're like, okay, I phoned her 2 times. Now she has to phone me at least 2 times. Oh, that's so much work.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Keeping score, like how the heck do you keep track? What do you write it down?
I guess maybe it's a feeling. They keep track in the back of their head or whatever, right? So I had a hard time explaining this to my mother-in-law because she's one of these kinds of women, right? And I was just like, I don't even phone my mother, right? And my mother doesn't get pissed at me. So like, why are you pissed at me? Because you phoned me 3 times and then we went 5 days without a phone call. And then you phoned me up and said, well, if you don't want to talk to me, then fine. I guess I'll just go die, right? Okay, like a typical mother-in-law guilty stuff.
Oh my gosh,
right?
she would not like to be my family member because I only contact people when I actually have something specific to talk about. I don't like just, oh, hi, I just was calling to talk and then expect a conversation to come out of it because that's not me. That would be like, oh, I just called to talk, okay. And then there would be no conversation after that.
Yeah. I had to actually explain to her that it's, okay, the reason I'm not calling you isn't because I don't like you or care about you. I really do. The reason I'm not calling you is because I don't call anybody.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I just don't. And you're going to have to learn how to live with that and stop keeping score because that's not who I am.
Yeah, I think it's that I think they just need attention, I don't know what it is. I mean, my mom, of course, she would love for me to call her more often than I do, but I'm not going to pick up the phone if I don't have anything to say. It's pointless. I don't like just talking just for the sake of talking if there's nothing,
Exactly.
I think the issue with my mother-in-law is that her sisters call constantly, right? Just to shoot the shit. And when they're not calling, then it's an indication that they are like that my mother-in-law is in the bad
doghouse. Oh, it's the silent treatment. See, now that's another one. I have a rough time. If I get mad at somebody, the silent treatment isn't just, it's not something I'm very good at maintaining. Like if you do something and I'm miffed about it, I'm going to say, you did X, and this is my objection to X being done, or to you doing X. And, try to get a dialogue going on it, or even just vent my spleen loudly. And sometimes with a wide vocabulary of nasty words if it's really pissed me off. But I'm not very good at just like not talking to people because I'm angry. If I don't talk to you because I'm angry, it's because I'm protecting you.
There you go. That's like I used to tell my kids, if I put you in your room and close the door, it's for your own protection.
Yeah. Well, I've never been that angry at my kids. But
I have.
But yeah.
I have.
But that's that harmless female thing. You can't hurt a fly because you have a vagina, and anytime any of us considers the idea of becoming violent, the vagina just steps forward and says, "Whoa, no, you can't do that. You're female," which is why that one girl stabbed the other girl to death.
You know what my vagina told me?
Uh-oh.
When my kids were small and screaming and couldn't be consoled because there was nothing wrong other than the fact that they wanted to scream at me. Okay. What my vagina told me was, sure, you could use their head as a soccer ball, but it would probably only make them scream more.
There you go. You're sure it wasn't just saying, "Here comes another one"?
Oh.
It's a publisher's clearinghouse.
I just like, honestly, like, there are days, you can ask Alison. I was talking with her on Skype today and screaming at my dogs. Like, literally, I have moments when I am just screaming at the top of my lungs, "What are you barking at?" Right? What are you barking at?
People say that to me all the time.
And it's like, and I'm like making myself hoarse. It feels really good to get it out. And then she turns around and barks at me, and then I start barking at her.
There you go. There you go. And those harmless women and children.
Yeah, no, we never yell. We never say anything untoward. We never make threats. Like, I don't know, honey, your life insurance policy is $375,000, and that's $375,000 more than you're worth right now. We never, ever, 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 ever do any of those things. And
we never threaten to tear somebody's arms off and beat them with them until
we never punch
they can't talk anymore. No.
We never punch a wall. We never, ever, ever do any of those things. Never spank our children. We never get angry because our rotten little passive-aggressive dog peed on the pear cider.
Oh, God.
That was sitting in the front hall. A 6-pack of pear cider sitting on the floor in the front hall, and he peed on it. Just like he peed on the 6-pack of Mike's Hard Lemonade last week.
Well, maybe the lemonade liked it. It's that's what the lemonade is into, and now it's even harder. That's one aspect of femininity that nobody ever talks about. Like, we get pissed off and scream at everything. But
never
as
thrown an empty plastic bottle at anybody in this house.
As far as the women heading for the border, in the past caravans, and then the next one I guess has already started, and the idea that they're the majority, which they're not, but if they were, there's another thing that's been going on quietly in the background for about the last 10 years that I think most Americans are unaware of, and that is women from South America coming to the United States, marrying American men, accusing them of abuse, and then taking everything they own. And it's not every woman that comes from South America, or every man who is white or black or non-Latino and marries Latina. It's not like a universal thing at all. But they have been targeted for, the women have been targeted for sort of recruitment by feminists in the domestic violence victims advocacy industry.
Oh, not just that, because I know a guy named Michael Parrott. I think he's based in Baltimore or just outside of Baltimore. But he runs a group called Victims of Immigration Fraud. He's sort of connected with the Men's Health Network and Stop Abusive and Violent Environments and a bunch of other organizations, NCFM. Right. So, and I got to know him. He was actually the guy who bankrolled my trip to go attend the 2012 National Organization for Women annual national conference, because he said you have to actually go and experience the insanity before you understand it.
Was that the one where they started with, "Are the vaginas in the house?"
Yeah, Eve Ensler, "Are the vaginas in the house?" And then she asked, "Are any vagina-friendly men in the house?" And I'm sitting there thinking, she refers to women as body parts, but men as persons. That's a little weird. Anyway, he essentially said that he told me that there are forums online where you, as a foreign person, you know, from Eastern Europe or from South America or from Thailand or the Philippines or wherever, right, where you can go and you can learn all of the details on how you can take advantage of the Violence Against Women Act, because what happens is, if you're a foreign person and you marry an American citizen and they have sponsored you, and then you make a claim of domestic violence, you not only get access to all of the services that are available to normally to victims of domestic violence, but you get on the fast track for a green card. You literally get on the fast track you're bumped to the front of the line for citizenship. So as long as you have your toe in the door for citizenship when you marry and when you make that complaint, right, you will be bumped up to the front of the queue and you will become a citizen, and you get to take them for half their assets and all of this other shit, right? And he said only 7 out of 8 victims of this particular form of fraud are men. So there is actually a small minority of women who marry men from other countries, bring them here, sponsor them, and then end up losing everything. And because they got accused of abuse under the provisions of the Violence Against Women Act, and their husbands go on to get their citizenship, you know, within an expedited amount of time. Yeah. It's, you know, like it's still the majority. Yeah, or it's probably more than that. Seven of the people who he brought when I was in Washington, D.C., for the False Accusations Summit, which was the same weekend as the National Organization for Women conference. Right. So I went Friday to NOW, and then I went Saturday to the False Accusation Summit, and then I went Sunday to NOW again and saw Eve Ensler in all of her glory. But they had spent a few days lobbying on Capitol Hill, and he had brought 7 men and 1 woman. So 7 male victims and 1 female victim of this particular form of immigration fraud. And the only person that the politicians were interested in talking to was the woman. Of course. There you go. And and it really is like these people go on these forums and they find out how to exploit the system before they even approach a man on a dating site. They already have their plan in place, right? The plan is, I'm going to use this man as my ticket to get over there, get sponsored, then I'm going to make this complaint, then I'm going to have all these services available and this fast track to citizenship, and then I'm going to be good to go, right? And so you essentially have forums that are devoted to teaching people how to commit this type of fraud. And I sat at the NOW conference during that time, right, in 2012, watching them, because the VAWA was up for reauthorization. And the Republicans said that the Democrats had sponsored their own bill, which was vastly expanded, and it vastly expanded protections for immigrants and things like that. And the Republicans had entered into they'd essentially said the Democrat bill is illegal because of funding issues. They said it's you can't pass this because the way that they're proposing to fund all of this stuff is actually an illegal appropriation of funds from the government, right? Or from fines and penalties and fees and stuff like that, right? So they're doing something illegal with this bill. And so here's our bill. And they ungendered a bunch of stuff in the Republican version of the bill. And that was the one that got authorized, which was, it would not have happened if the funding provisions in the Democrats' bill had been legal, right? But I'm sitting there at the National Organization for Women conference, and they're talking about how the Republicans' bill is the bad bill and how we need to expand these protections for immigrant women who are coming in as mail order brides because they're already exploited, right? Every single mail order bride is a victim of exploitation.
By virtue of being a mail order bride.
Even if she's a mail order bride because she went on some forum and found out here's a fast track to citizenship and, you know, half a house and half a guy's income, right? And all you got to do is say he hit you. So there you go.
Yeah, this is one of the things that, you know, that's never going to get discussed during the debates, basically, that you see on any of the mainstream news shows, whether it's the left-wing ones, whether it's the ones that are far more right-leaning. You just won't see them talking about this because it portrays women in a very accurately bad light. This is not to say, again, this is not to say that you can't marry someone from another country and find love that way, but I would exercise just as much caution doing that as I would marrying someone from the United States if I were a guy at this point, maybe even more, simply because there is that added incentive. And you know, this is one of those situations where I get flack from some other women in the men's rights movement for this, but while I don't like what basically the implications of the men going their own way phenomena are for the future, I do totally support not necessarily the phenomena itself, but the attitudes behind it. The fact that you do have to be cautious, the fact that you do have to be aware of the dangers, the fact that you can't just, oh, you know, I'm going to trust this woman because this woman is somebody I know. You know, and I do think that it's a perfectly valid response. It's not necessarily a matter of whether it's going to be good for civilization or not. People have a right to do what's best for themselves, you know, in terms of who they're going to have a relationship with and whether they're going to have one or not. What kind of work they're going to do and how they're going to fit into society. You know, it's not going to be good for the future if nothing is done to stop the pattern of abuse being engaged in by feminists either. So, hey, you're, as far as, you know, the women who do get on me for supporting MGTOW, you know, show me a better idea. Because I don't really see one, honestly. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with guys who choose to be in relationships. I'm simply saying that there is nothing wrong with guys who choose to walk away, you know, not be in relationships. That's their right.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, any guy that's paying attention, I mean, the writing is really on the wall. I mean, marriage is just it's risky. just in and of itself, but there are added risks when you marry a foreigner. And these are things that guys need to know. If you marry a foreigner, let's forget, let's take the whole illegal immigrant caravan thing. If you marry someone and that person, or you divorce within, I think it's like 10 years or something like that, and that person then goes to the government and applies for assistance, you're on the hook for that financially. So
Yeah.
There's many risks in marriage alone, but guys need to pay attention and just really be informed of what those risks are, because after you sign, it's too late.
I'd also like to add too, and Tom Maddy, who married a woman from Thailand. He's a friend of mine here in Alberta. He married a woman from Thailand, and then she attacked him with a knife, and then took the kids to the domestic violence shelter, and then ran off to Thailand with them. And he spent 2 years, 2 years essentially trying to get them back. And he actually translated this phrase for me, which is a common phrase in Thailand now. I'd better get home, or the ducks will have something to eat. Now, Lauren, do you have any idea what that might mean?
Yeah, I can think of what that would mean. Yeah.
Okay, so it's actually kind of a little bit of in fashion in Thailand. It's so in fashion that there are doctors who have had to specialize in penis reattachment surgery, because women who are angry with their husbands cut off their husbands' penises fairly often in Thailand. These docile, biddable Asian women, that everybody says, oh, go get a woman from Asia. She's going to be docile and biddable.
So harmless.
Right? They cut off their husbands' penises and then throw them out the window down into the yard for the livestock to fight over. So, you literally have guys in bars, and this is a testimony to what men are like. What men are like, their ability to rub a little dirt in it and move on, their ability to dust themselves off and move on, their ability to not be offended by things, their ability to not feel like they're being treated unfairly, even when they are, right? Is that it's a joke among guys at the bar late at night. Well, I'd better get home or the ducks will have something to eat.
Yeah, if it was the other way around, it would be, I'm oppressed.
Oh no, it's literally there was a woman. Okay, this was actually Bill Burr, one of his more recent, one of the, not the last one, but the one before, comedy sketches, right? He's talking about, he went to some bar in Alabama, and they had a chalkboard for the daily specials, and on the chalkboard, the waitress had written, "We like our beer the way we like our violence, domestic."
Oh boy. How long did it take?
He said someone was fired right away.
Oh boy.
Right away.
Jeez, oh Pete's. Yeah.
Right? Not allowed to joke about it. Ducks eating human penises, that's fodder for jokes. But making the joke that, what do you tell a woman with 2 black eyes? Nothing you didn't already tell her twice. That is somehow, get ready for the demonetization of the stream.
Yeah, that's probably going to happen. We'll be demonetized. We might be, we'll be demonized for it. And of course we have our resident feminist troll in the chat who has been begging for attention. Begging, she's totally asking for it.
Oh, what's she been saying?
All kinds of fun things. But the funniest thing she's doing is simultaneously promoting the female victim narrative while calling men weak for giving a shit at all if any men or boys anywhere might possibly have been victimized in any way, shape, or form. Regardless of whether we're talking about something like that, or talking about the boys murdered by Boko Haram, or the boys who are raped in Afghanistan, and so on. So I mean, this is pretty representative in my experience of feminism. If a woman walking down the street gets greeted too enthusiastically or not politely enough by a man, or simply when she didn't want to be greeted, she's a victim. But men are weak.
But if she didn't get greeted at all, she's also
if
a
they
victim.
if she didn't get greeted at all, she's also a victim. But men are weak if they give a shit that little boys are getting anally raped. And they're weak if they give a shit that little boys are being murdered. They're weak if they give a shit that everything they own might be taken by a liar. They're weak if they give a shit that they might be thrown in jail for somebody else's lie. But, that's not female privilege or anything, huh? It's certainly women are the most oppressed, especially the women in the Western world that has been built around our comfort and our safety.
There's the air conditioning thing, Hannah. I mean, come on. Come on.
Yeah, there we go.
Seriously oppressive.
There we go. Now, that's another one. I don't know how far south the women in the caravans are coming from exactly. Are they coming from far enough south that it gets back into the cold regions of the world? Or are they accustomed to really high temperatures? Because if they work in offices here, are they going to be the next people going, I'm being discriminated against because of air conditioning?
Hot and humid, guaranteed.
Yeah. So there you go. There's our stark contrast between
man-spreading, mansplaining, man-interrupting.
Yep. We should start putting military age at the beginning of all that. Military age man-spreading. Military age man-interrupting. Military age mansplaining.
Yeah, well, all I know is every time I see a feminist in any kind of discussion, she's the one doing the most interrupting and the most screaming.
Well, you know how many feminists it takes to screw in a light bulb?
Just one. She stands still and waits for the world to revolve around her.
And with that, I think I'm going to get on to our super chats, because we do have a few. We don't have a ton, but we have, which is good because probably YouTube's going to take them all. Hokey Bokisa gave us $1.99 and put an arrow that said soon at 7:02. I think we hadn't started yet. And then another one, the sound symbol. Was the sound interrupted at the beginning of the show? Because I know it was interrupted earlier. I've been having some difficulty with OBS wanting to... Oh, that's right. We had the show started out with no sound. That's right. Yeah, OBS has been a pain in the butt. I really need to install it on the computer instead, because it's not working. And Tyler Preston gave us $5 and said, and where's Christy Winters to talk about what is happening to these little boys? Nothing. Too busy being a smug cunt. Actually, too busy being a smug C******NT.
Okay, but, too busy spreading the false information that it's legal to orally rape an unconscious woman in Oklahoma.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I know it's not legal to do that, but she said it was legal to do that. She repeated. You know why? You know how that whole myth started?
Let me guess. She doesn't like the label, the law that outlaws the behavior gives the crime.
Okay, here's the thing. Okay, so there was this dumbass prosecutor who had a situation where it was like cut and dried. They had semen in this passed out girl's mouth, right? The guy dumped her on her freaking doorstep, and her grandmother opened the door and found her with semen all over her face, right? Okay, so we have this situation right? With a passed out girl with semen all over her face and no memory. It's like cut and dried. It's like absolutely
open and shut case, no pun
open
intended.
And shut case, okay? And the prosecutor decides to try it as forcible sodomy because oral sex in Oklahoma is considered sodomy. Okay. Charges the guy with forcible sodomy, and the guy is acquitted because he didn't have to apply any force under the definition of force under the law, right? Now, the prosecutor could have prosecuted it under sexual battery, which can get you up to 10 years in prison, right? Okay, and would have been open and shut, cut and dried, sexual battery, doing something sexual with somebody against their consent. That is the definition of that crime, right? The appellate court or the Supreme or the high court in Oklahoma said we're not going to expand the definition of forcible just for this one case.
Yeah, so
right?
essentially...
Then Christy Winters and all the other feminists said it's not a crime to orally rape an unconscious woman in Oklahoma.
So essentially, the prosecutor used the wrong charge rather than
it would be like if somebody
being legal.
It would be like if somebody broke into my house while I was away on vacation and stole a bunch of stuff, and the prosecutor had charged them with robbery and not burglary.
Right. That's brilliant. So obviously, Christy Winters has the IQ to be discussing exactly this topic on, one of the mainstream news stations where they use the two stereotropes that we've been talking about. But
there you go.
Yeah, good old. I guess Frosty the Frosty the no brain.
50 Splinters is their official name.
Yeah, we have Chicken Winters. It's CH1CK3NW1N95. Chicken Winters gave us $5 and said, my mother and I share many of the same hobbies and actually like spending time together, so we're fortunate to avoid the you never call thing. Yeah, my family and I actually enjoyed working together, so we don't have that problem either. I actually go up and see them quite frequently now because my parents are aging, but it still is kind of funny the differences in cultures on how the obligation of youth toward their parents is handled. I think a lot of cultures, they have figured out it's not affordable for the family's responsibility to its elders to be transferred to the state entirely in every family. There are maybe families that simply are not going to be able to live up to their responsibility, but it's partly because of state interference in family income already. And in our society here in the United States, we have gone exactly the opposite route, and it's actually abnormal for the family to retain responsibility for its elders rather than transferring that responsibility to the state. Everybody's on Medicare, and nursing homes make most of their money from it. And taking everything you own when you go to live in a nursing home.
Yeah, but I would say that if your parents are in a nursing home, the staff at my grandmother's nursing home were quite honest with my parents in that they said, well, if what's her name down the hall or your mom pushes the call button at the exact same time, we're going to go to your mom first. And the reason is because there is somebody here visiting your mom 4 days a week, and this woman down the hall,
nobody ever shows up.
Nobody ever shows up, maybe once every few months, right? And and it's not that we don't care about her as much as we care about your mom. It's that
we don't want to get in trouble with you.
Somebody's holding our feet to the fire here with your mom, and nobody's doing that with her.
Yeah,
so,
I've worked in nursing homes. I worked in 2 different nursing homes, very different. One of them was pretty much along state guidelines, A nurse's aide can be responsible for 14 patients at any given time, and several of them can be senile dementia patients, and several of them can have mobility issues. Some of them can be entirely immobile without assistance, and you are responsible for all of them for 8 hours, and you have, feedings and bathings and making sure people get dressed and everything to take care of, so you got to do the work fast. And it does make a difference with a lot of people, whether family comes in regularly or not. And even when it's not an ethical difference, there are things like, I learned the most effective ways to communicate with some of my residents, and basically help me help them, if that makes sense, from their families. From their families. So if somebody says to me, well, my husband is hard of hearing, but he's not just hard of hearing. He's hard of hearing high-pitched noises, so you need to speak in a low voice to him so that he understands when you say, I'm going to help you change your clothes, because otherwise you're just a young lady who came into his room and started taking his clothes off, and he's going to knock you across the room, which he should. And then I know a whole bunch of things that help me with that guy. And, you learn from family members that my grandmother's favorite thing in the world is these 3 songs, and if you sing them with her during your time working with her, she will be as cheerful and compliant and cooperative as a kid. But if you just come in and start working with her, she gets nervous and afraid of you, and she'll fight you all the way. And these are things that you learn from family. You don't figure that stuff out unless you witness somebody else doing it, or you hear somebody talking about it. And if you get the chance for neither,
Or you're, like my grandmother, there was this one point where, it was fairly close to when she died. It was about 6 months from when she died. She died at 99, and she was continent until the last 2 days of her life. So she never, ever, ever had to deal with adult diapers or a bedpan or anything ever, until the last 2 days. But about 6 months before she died, the home phoned my mom and said, we've had to throw out 3 of your mother's nightgowns. Can you please buy her some more nightgowns? And my mom is like, well, what's the problem? And they said, she's cutting them up. We don't know why she's cutting up her nightgowns. And so my mom ended up going in and talking to my grandmother, and got the actual truth out of my grandmother, which my grandmother didn't want to tell strangers because it's embarrassing. She was essentially, she had osteoporosis, osteoarthritis. She was not moving very quickly. But she could still get up and get to the bathroom, just not always on time. And when she had this nightgown that was floor length and she had to gather it up, right, then she might not make it down onto the toilet seat on time, right, to go pee. So she was cutting a slit up the back of her nightgown to her waist, right, so that she just would have to pull it forward and sit down, and it would speed things up. And when the staff were, they'd look at the nightgowns, oh, this nightgown is torn, it's cut up, it's whatever, and they'd throw it away. And but I mean, like, she would not have disclosed that to the staff necessarily. She told it to my mom. My mom conveyed it to the staff, and the staff were like, oh, wow, that makes sense. But it's just like, you have to realize that in a nursing home, even if you're close to the people who are looking after you, they're still not
right. Exactly.
Family.
Yeah.
They're not.
And it's hard to talk to strangers about stuff like that. I mean, I've been in and out of hospital since I was a little kid. And it's hard to talk to even strangers of the same sex as you are about things like that, especially if you're from a conservative era or a conservative family, or you're just a shy person. So, but anyway, these are that's sort of, we've sort of strayed off of
we
off
did
the
we
topic,
went off road.
right? We went off road, but yeah, the caregiving of the parents thing, it's really become like, people in the United States don't necessarily, and maybe even in Canada, don't necessarily understand that aspect of other cultures where they want to have a son because they know their son is going to be responsible for them when they reach adulthood. And the parents are old. They don't necessarily understand that the daughter is going to be, for lack of a better term, a burden. In some cultures, a father is responsible for her daughter until she gets married. And, God forbid he die before she gets married, because then her brothers and her uncles and her cousins, the nearest male relative, is going to be responsible for her. So you get this random woman dumped on you, basically, in that society, if she doesn't get married. Work really hard to get their daughters married. And that's the idea that it's misogynistic to not want to be in that position. It's kind of stupid. It's not misogynistic. It's not about hating women. It's about not wanting to be in that position of obligation. And if the sexes were reversed, and you don't
want to be one of the 1,000 or so cab drivers in Tehran alone who are over the age of 79,
working to support unmarried daughters.
Working to support their adult, unmarried, university-educated, unmarried daughters.
Yeah. And yeah. If it was the other way around and it was men who were putting their parents in that position, it would be deemed a social problem. But it's women who are putting their parents in that position, so it's deemed part of the social order. And it's misogynistic to object. Again, female privilege. So there's our, there's our situation. And this idea of bringing in women and children because they're supposedly harmless. We've demonstrated in other streams, and we've discussed in ways here, no, they're not. In addition to being potentially violent, they also have the capacity to engage in fraud, and there is at least one type of fraud they can engage in that is almost unique to women. So they're not harmless. But even if they were harmless, even if they were just women and children coming into the United States for help, for a better life, not necessarily refugees, not necessarily seeking asylum, because asylum is something that's actually very specific. You have to meet certain conditions to be entitled to asylum, but just in trouble, just needing money, just needing a place to stay. I can't remember who it was at the beginning of the show that commented in the chat, the United States is not a lifeboat. And that was close. That's a very close thing to what I would say about that. To a lot of people in the world, the United States is a lifeboat. But what happens when you put more people in the lifeboat, and more until the weight of the people becomes more than the buoyancy of the lifeboat can counteract?
And should we be putting people in the lifeboat that wouldn't be, whose ships aren't sinking?
Yeah, we put people in the lifeboat whose ships aren't sinking.
Pleasant, but they're not, maybe not very, very pleasant ships to be on, but they aren't sinking.
And if you're bringing people into a lifeboat, you want to know you're bringing people in that aren't going to stab the other passengers, that aren't going to throw them over, that aren't going to engage in behaviors that are going to tip the lifeboat, right? And you want to know that you haven't brought them in at such a rate that you sink the lifeboat, because the weight of the people in the lifeboat is greater than the buoyancy of the lifeboat can make up for. So maybe the United States is a lifeboat to a lot of people. But it can't be the lifeboat everybody climbs into without any vetting process and without any limitations. Period.
No, I totally agree with that. I do think that we should make it easier. There should be an easier path towards legal immigration. And, because it's a long process. It takes a long time. I think if it was easier, but still very heavily regulated, that is probably the best answer right now to the problems that we're having. I mean, you have to be able to vet the people that you're bringing in. But also, I see the opposite side of that coin, where we are taking the best and the brightest from these countries. We're saying we only want the best. We don't want morally, we don't want criminals coming in. We want the best and brightest. But if we take every country's best and brightest, we're leaving those countries with the people who cannot make their own countries better. The people who are smart and intelligent should probably stay in those countries and make their country better. But instead they come here and it just becomes like this cycle, and it doesn't benefit anyone in the long run.
V talks about that quite a bit regarding Romania and Britain, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's all these Romanians, and with Brexit coming, there's all these news stories in the Guardian and the Telegraph and stuff saying, who's gonna wipe our old people's bums, and who's gonna like cook our falafels and stuff, right? If we don't have these Romanians. And V is like, well, nobody's doing that here because they're all doing that over in Britain, right? And so like maybe these people should come home. Maybe these people should come home and try and make the country that they're from a better place. Try and actually make the economy grow, right? And all of this stuff here in Romania. Maybe that's what we should be doing, and not doing the brain drain. And one of the things that frustrates me so much about, particularly about, and I'm gonna go into this again, medicine, right? And the reason I go into it is because there's almost no limit to how many engineering degrees a country is prepared to issue. There's almost no limit to how many computer science degrees a country is going to issue, right? But medical degrees are so expensive to the taxpayer that the seats in med school are limited. They are limited, right? Because the taxpayer portion of it, like in Canada, for instance, the average student costs the taxpayer $20,000 a year, right, in post-secondary. So essentially, for every 4-year degree, the taxpayer is paying $80,000. That's in addition to tuition fees and all of that stuff, right? Okay, and student loans and everything else. Taxpayers covering $80,000 of that, right? But when you're looking at a medical degree, that's anywhere between $250,000 and $500,000, start to finish, right? And so the spots are finite, okay? And when you have women taking these spots and then, I'm going to take 3 years off when I have my kids, and then I'm only going to come back part-time, and I'm only going to come back during office hours, what do we do? We poach doctors from South Africa, from Thailand, from Malaysia, from the Philippines, from Nigeria, right? We poach doctors from countries where people have even less access to healthcare than we do, to make up for the fact that half of our fucking doctors don't want to work full time. How fair is that?
And that's happening here in the United States too, although not necessarily for the same reason. I don't think that there's as much limitation in the U.S. in terms of spots for medical training. I think there's actually less people going into the higher ends of medicine. Because you can make so much money as a nurse. You can make so much money, for instance, as a nurse practitioner. You can make quite a bit of money even in some of the lower areas of medicine. We have licensed practical nurses that only go to school for 2 years. and make a significant more amount than, say, what I would make in what I do. What I do, I'm barely making more than what I would make in retail. So, and then you also have schools like the ones in the area where I live. There's like 4 or 5 different schools just in the Dayton metro area turning out LPNs and massage therapists and other at that nursing level where they've had the amount of education that a LPN would have of medicine at rapid rates, and everything is specialized. So you can become a nurse, or you can become a respiratory therapist, or you can become a physical therapist, or you can become an x-ray technician, and all that stuff. To go into getting your medical degree to become a doctor, it's this huge amount of work, this huge amount of study, and a huge amount of time where you can stop at any of these other points and be quite satisfied with the living you make. So there's not so much necessarily the fact here of limitation of positions. We end up having a lot of people come from foreign countries to study medicine here and stay. They find themselves in an environment that they really like. They encounter a level of freedom they've never experienced before, or a level of prosperity they've never experienced before, and they just don't. They apply for residential status, and they don't leave. And it's not bad necessarily for us, but if they came here to study and then go home, and then they stay, it's not great for their country.
Well, we have an issue, like a little microcosm of this issue in Prince Edward Island, which is a province that is, I think it only has a population of like 300 and some thousand people, right? So it's the smallest Canadian province. They don't have a medical school. So the closest medical schools are in New Brunswick and Ontario. And what the government of Prince Edward Island does is it reserves 4 spots per year for med students from Prince Edward Island in those 2 schools. So University of Toronto and University of New Brunswick. And they essentially, they pay $57,000 a year, the government does, per spot, to reserve a spot specifically for a Prince Edward Island med student to attend these universities. Now, these Prince Edward Island med students, they can compete for any of the other spots, but these spots are reserved specifically for Prince Edward Island students. And what kept on happening is these Prince Edward Island students would go to Toronto or to New Brunswick, and they would start enjoying, life in a city that actually has close to 1 million or even more than 1 million people, as opposed to an entire province that only has 300,000, right? And they would start to enjoy the metropolitan lifestyle, and they would decide to stay. So there's this huge question as to whether the Prince Edward Island government would just stop funding these seats in med schools, because why would they? Why would they, if people are going from Prince Edward Island to these universities and not coming back to practice medicine? Why are we investing $200 and some $1,000 a year, right, of taxpayer money, holding these spots open specifically for students to go learn medicine and come back and practice when they're not coming back and practicing? So, dog, oh my God, what is your problem? But so we have a situation, and people were absolutely appalled at the idea of, maybe essentially making it so that if you took one of those spots, right, and didn't go back for at least 8 years or something like that to practice medicine, that you'd have to pay that $57,000 a year back, right? People were appalled. How could you? How could you? People should be free to do what they want. And it's like, but the government is literally paying you.
Yeah, that accountability is just so hard.
It's so difficult. And it's not even like a foreign student coming from elsewhere to the United States, because they pay more in tuition, right? Foreign students pay more in tuition. And their governments aren't necessarily paying for them to go and train in the United States. Maybe they are in some cases, but I would expect that it's probably more of a private venture on the part of the student, right, or their family, to come here and be a foreign student and pay the extra tuition and pay the extra expenses and all of that stuff, right? And do that, right? So you're looking at this being a privately funded thing. But in this case, it's a government funded thing. And these people are happy to take $57,000 a year. Do you realize that 2009 was the first year of my life that my household income was $57,000 or more, right? So, I mean, it's not an unsubstantial amount of money, right? And they're taking that from the government, and then they're just like giving the government the finger and saying, well, fuck you. Get a doctor from Nigeria, because I don't want to go back to PEI.
Well, you know,
so selfish.
This misunderstanding of the word free, okay? Education is not free. Nothing is free. Well, there are, I'll take that back. There are things that are free, okay. But
air, the sight of the blue sky,
yeah,
the feel of the breeze on your face,
right, all those,
the sound of your dog whining for no reason. Those kinds of things, all free.
Hugs are free most of the time.
Yes.
Unless you hug the wrong person, then it can get expensive.
Oh, boob inspections. Always free. Always free.
And there you go. But yeah, in addition to the issue of people taking advantage basically of the training system and leaving their countries because the training system here came complete with a freer world to live in. We also have another issue that indicates a need for vetting of people crossing the border. And this just came out just earlier today, actually. But there are areas of California. Judicial Watch just actually settled a lawsuit. Settlement agreement of its lawsuit means that as many as 1.5 million names are going to be removed essentially from the Los Angeles County voting registry, or National Voter Registration Act requires removal of inactive names from the voter rolls. And apparently there were, in some areas, more registered voters than there were people. So either they had dead voters still registered, or there were people who were illegal immigrants who were registered to vote. But being unable to track who's in your country, being unable to keep track of who's registering to vote, not knowing who's approaching the polls, and so on, there you have a situation where illegal immigrants, again, can have a profound effect on the country. California is a traditionally blue state, but and of course it's pretty standard, at least, to expect that illegal immigrants, if they manage to illegally vote, are going to vote blue. But they still could affect elections in areas. There are areas of California that are not necessarily blue. And if it was the reverse, if it was these immigrants wanting to vote Republican, the Democrats would be screaming from the rooftops, "This is illegal, you can't do it." But what do we get? Oh, you gotta let them in. It's just harmless women and children.
Oh, but oh god! Even looking at the whole controversy over requiring photo ID in order to vote, and and you literally had, oh god, I don't even remember who it was. It might have been Mark Deese or Dice or whatever his name is, or somebody like that, right? Going around New York City, right?
Yeah.
And asking various Black people, do you have photo ID? And they're like, no, duh, like everybody does, right?
You know, that
but
that might have been Waters.
Yeah, but the Maxine Waters?
No,
Jesse
Jesse Waters. Waters World.
Oh, yeah.
I'm Waters,
Yeah,
and this is my world. That guy.
Yeah.
I want to say it might have been Fleckus, but yeah, I remember that.
There's a few people that I've seen. They run around and they ask people questions. Waters has a thing where he runs around and asks people questions that you should know the answer to, but so many people don't. But I've seen him going around asking questions like that too.
Yeah, no, I forget who it was, but he was asking all of these Black people, all of these people of color, right? Black, Hispanic, right? Do you have picture ID? Do you have photo ID? And they were like, well, duh, of course. I need it for the liquor store. I need it to get cigarettes. I need it to, I need to go to the bank. I
couldn't get a job without it.
Everybody has that. Like, who wouldn't have it? And then he was like, do you know how to get photo ID? And they're like, I go down on my local DMV, right? Or my local registry. It's like just around the block, right? And I get it. And so it's like, it's honestly, it's so fucking ridiculous that the Democrats are like, requiring photo ID is racist. Well, the only reason why it would be racist is if everybody who's an illegal immigrant who would not have photo ID and not be able to get it is non-white, right? And we know that that's not the case. We know that there are people who are white who are in the country illegally. They're from Eastern Europe or maybe from Poland or, wherever. Oh my God, dog. Toenails. Gee. But I was
Zering says Amy or Ami, I don't know if it's male or female, Horowitz was the individual.
Well, there you go. There you go. Well, I don't know who it was, but kudos to him for actually, essentially putting the lie to the idea that Black people are so inept
that they can't get photo ID.
That they just can't get photo ID. They just are incapable of figuring out how to do it. Like, unfucking believable. Talk about bigotry of low expectations.
Yep.
You can't get in the club without ID.
Talk about thinking about Blacks as inferior, right? People of color are inferior. They don't even know how to get photo ID. And they can't be expected to learn because they're just that dumb, apparently.
Yeah, and apparently he started off in Berkeley University in camera talking to white students about the photo ID. I bet he got very different answers from Berkeley's white students than he did from the people they were talking about.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Oh, and by the way,
the white Berkeley students saying, and they were all saying, "Oh yeah, it's racist. It's racist because Black people don't have equal access to those kinds of things like photo ID, right?" And then he talked to a bunch of Black people, and they're like, "What the fuck, man?"
Yeah, you're privileged when you have no clue what goes on in neighborhoods outside of your own.
Oh God,
like that's privilege right there. But by the way, the article I found in the midst of this, there's a line in it. 11 of California's 58 countries have registration rates, not just one, 11, exceeding 100% of the age-eligible citizenry, the complaint alleged. So 11 different counties in California have such messed up voter registries that they have more people registered to vote than they do have people living there that are old enough to be eligible to vote. That's pretty bad.
Wow.
Either they are really outdated or they have had some people register that shouldn't be registering. So there you go. Once again, we're right back to... Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they're all illegal immigrants, but there is definitely a problem there.
Or they're trying to go toe-to-toe with Broward County.
There we go. Well, it could be a problem like in Chicago, where no matter what you voted in Chicago while you were alive, after you're dead, you vote Democrat. So that one's horrible, but it's the reputation.
It's horrible, but it's true.
It's probably. I wouldn't be surprised to find out it's true. There were also, now Ohio had this problem. Because I remember there was a similar lawsuit here, and I know Kentucky had this problem. So it's not just California. It's just with California it's been recent, and with California it's been going on for much longer, and of course. I believe the lawsuit actually went farther.
Well, we know that this is a problem because it's how Sideshow Bob was elected mayor.
There you go. That's it. We just can't have people like that in office, right? Him and Hillary.
Well, I disagree with his Bart killing policy, but I agree with his Selma killing policy.
There you go. Oh, of course, we in Ohio are accustomed to mayors who get into the sideshow business. I mean, Jerry Springer was the mayor of Cincinnati before he started his career in television. So
well, we did you one better.
I know.
We had Rob Ford. We had Rob Ford in Toronto. And he even made it onto T-shirts that were for sale in frickin' T-shirt stores in the United States.
Yeah,
that's line, but no.
There is, one thing you can say about Americans: we do appreciate a guy who knows how to party.
Yes,
we appreciate a guy who knows how to smoke crack and still stay mayor.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And also, I had to admire him, and I'm going to say it again. I'm going to tell the story again. The female council person who accused him of saying, "I want to eat your pussy," when he was confronted by the press, he said, "Why would I say that? I got plenty to eat at home."
There you go.
It was just like, bam.
That is like a John Wayne answer right there.
Yeah.
That's like a Winston Churchill answer.
Guys got to start calling him the other Duke.
That's a Winston Churchill answer. If you were my husband, I'd poison your tea. If I were your husband, I'd drink it.
There we go. And with that, I think we have talked the topic to death. We've talked a few other topics to death. I think we've pretty much put the nail in the coffin of those men over there. It's pretty obvious that tactic is shit, and we're gonna have to watch out for it. The big problem we have is that it is,
video. Go watch Alison's video.
Yeah. And I did put a link in the low bar. That video is not on YouTube. There are other threat narrative videos of hers that I did find on YouTube. Son of Threat Narrative, The Ugly Tropes, though, is available on Dailymotion, and I put that link right below the link to our Patreon post for the after show. So there's the link to that. If you look on YouTube for Alison Tiemann Threat Narrative videos, I recommend watching all of them. And if you've got kids, they should watch as many of those as you can tolerate having them watch. I don't think there's anything in them that your kids shouldn't see. They might learn a few words, but the reality is, especially boys need to learn that particular manner of fighting because they're blindsided by it. But even girls, a lot of girls who are more rational don't engage in relational aggression on the level that other girls do. They end up being blindsided by it as well. So it's a good thing to teach your kids to deal with that kind of aggression. And it's a good thing to be aware of it because it's going to hit you at some point in your life as well. So Alison's threat narrative series, the entire series, is a good thing to look up and watch. And that one specifically that Karen mentioned is the one that I'm going to link because I only found it on Daily Motion, so you won't necessarily be able to search it on YouTube and find it. And with that, I want to thank everybody for listening. I think we have another 2.5 hour long sausage, I believe. And so thanks to my co-host for sticking it out. And thanks to everyone behind the scenes who makes Honey Badger Radio happen. And good night.